You are listening to the Overwatch League Network, the podcast with Deadeye on all the Overwatch League news and information. The show with Tactical Visor on the statistics and analysis. Here are your hosts, Totally Drunk, Spider, and Slambo.
What is up, guys, and welcome back to Overwatch League Network, the podcast with Deadeye on all the latest Overwatch League news, information, and esports analysis. I am your host, Totally Drunk, and tonight on episode 101, we have a whirlwind week of Overwatch League juice to break down. The off-season is in full swing. Free agents have been hitting the market. There's been a lot of stuff going on, and we got a lot to get through tonight. But before we can get into the news and introduce you to my guest tonight, let me just take a quick moment to thank everyone who is joining us tonight on Twitch for our live show, and of course, gonna thank all of our repeat listeners out there. So joining me tonight should be a familiar voice if you follow either the Path to Pro scene or if you are an avid listener to the Mash Those Buttons podcast family, that being Push the Point in this case for Overwatch. Tonight, I'm joined by LoBosco. LoBosco, thank you so much for being here with me tonight. And, you know, what a crazy week it has been with everything going on.
Well, first off, thank you for having me. It has been a crazy week. We've been hearing about, it's going to be crazy, and everybody's posting on Twitter. What are you talking about? This has been, resident sleeper. Really haven't had to press F5. Well, now just all hell breaks loose, and things are going nuts. People are putting explosion emotes everywhere, gifs that have nuclear bombs going off. It's just all crazy and madness now. So I'm excited that this is the week I get to come on and hang out with you, Totem.
Yeah, you and I were talking pre-show, because initially, it was kind of like a slow drip effect that was going on. We were hearing about, releases going on. There weren't a ton of, free agent sign-ins. Not really a whole lot of promotions in regards to contenders to their respective Overwatch League teams. And then all of a sudden, we have the floodgates opening. We have Sideshow accidentally leaking potential moves, which we'll be getting into, which, based on some of the sources from some of the other esports sites out there, seem to be pretty credible, but they're not official yet. So, there's stuff that's happened and stuff that is currently in the works potentially that are just as big, if not bigger, than some of the moves that have already been made. But what a whirlwind week it has been, and let's jump right into it. So, for all of the Houston Outlaws fans out there, it's been a pretty hectic week. They did go out and they found a new head coach, and they have turned to Harsha, who was the assistant coach for the Vancouver Titans this past year. So, looking at 2020 for the Outlaws, we have the Harsha Homecoming. He is a hometown boy from Houston. And, this is someone who basically started as a content creator. So, we have essentially gone from this point, speaking of Open Division, we have the casters. So, there's casters to contenders, and then we have content creators to coaches. So, when are you throwing your name in the ring at this point?
I guess I need to start. I mean, we're seeing it happen everywhere, not just in Overwatch. League of Legends, Papa Smithy, who some Overwatch fans who are a fan of Apex, they should know that name because he was on, I think, almost every single one of the championship broadcasts for all of the Apex seasons that happened of Overwatch. He's been a very big League of Legends caster, has made the transition over to general manager of 100 Thieves. So apparently this has become like a theme. And we do see this happen in traditional sports as well. Somebody who was, he was a coach before, but has gone back to the coaching realm. If you look at the Oakland Raiders, you have just things like that happen everywhere. So me personally, I'm not going to go that route unless I really dive into it. I would not be somebody to do so, but I do have a coaching experience in my life. So I guess I could do it, right? Like why not? Harsha, though, totally makes sense. He's been a really good assistant coach. He's somebody who clearly that's what he was trying to do when he was a content creator. The guy who's his general manager was a content creator in Flame before he became a general manager. He was also a caster for World Cup stuff, was Flame. It sort of makes sense, I guess, with the team dynamic that Harsh is the one that they pick. And Like, I don't know how none of us really thought that Harsha was a good choice too. Like, because he is, in my opinion, he is like a really good choice for somebody as far as a head coaching position. Especially when you look at what he did with Vancouver as an assistant coach there. He was also part of the coaching staff that helped build the San Francisco Shock in year one. So from all of these different things, it's like, yeah, I guess I need to go that route. Maybe I got to talk to Jane a little bit about this and be like, hey, Jane, what should I do here?
Right. Well, if you're looking at the Outlaws, of course, it was a pretty rough season for them, finishing 9-19. They failed to make any sort of playoff appearance, but Harsha, he has learned under he was with Pagan recently with the Vancouver Titans, and the Outlaws for a while now, like we haven't really known what's been going on behind the scenes. So as soon as this was announced, we still don't know whether or not like the sale deal has been finalized, but this was a very I don't want to know if it was like a shocking thing to me, but it was more out of comfort. Like, okay, like it was just a moment where I could just sit down and not like have like that panic moment at the time with the Outlaws, despite like all of the unknowns at this point. But this was not actually the only signing that we heard from the Houston camp this week, as they also went out and they made their first free agent player signing of the offseason, and they've picked up Hydration from the Los Angeles Gladiators. So looking back, Hydration, he'd played for the Gladiators both in Season 1 and Season 2. Both of the seasons, you had the Gladiators, who were top 6 teams in both seasons. And, this is someone that's primarily been known as a projectile specialist, but, we've seen him flex to the off-tank role quite often, whether it is on Hammond. We've even seen him on Orisa.
Sigma, too.
And Sigma. And, right now, the Outlaws' biggest question mark still revolves around their off-tank situation. Now, they were rumored to be in the run-in to sign Nevix, but, that didn't go through, according to some of the reports that we're seeing. But, right now, when you're looking at the DPS for the Outlaws, there is a little bit of overlap here. I know a lot of people initially with the Dante sign-in going back to, this last season were like, okay, he's going to be a good fit, but then it was kind of like middle of the road with the Outlaws, and I've seen a lot of people that are drawing kind of like a similar parallel, even despite not seeing Hydration on the team as of yet. But are you worried at all about the overlap that you have between someone like Hydration and Jake, who is still under contract on the Outlaws this year?
I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, because as we've seen is sort of how this meta has developed, where sometimes having 2 players that can play the same hero actually works out, because because they kind of have also a little bit different pools around them, where like say you needed the Reaper and both guys could play Reaper, but one's better at Mei and one's better at Doomfist. It's good to have that overlap. It's not necessarily a bad thing to have. It's also, this is kind of a high profile move too, as far as like a free agent acquisition for Houston. And so is Harsha. Harsha's definitely a big name acquisition as far as a coaching thing. So this is really a different trend than what we've seen from Houston up until this point as well. We still don't know if they're officially been bought yet, which is kind of a weird thing. So we don't know where these decisions are coming from. Is this Immortal saying, yeah, go ahead, do whatever you want? Or is this actually, the Zeebster, Lee Zeben and whoever he's having help run this saying, yeah, this is your budget, go have fun? We don't really know. But looking at both of them, like these are things that actually like kind of make sense. Like I don't think Hydration was like priority number 1 as far as like people you would say you would want Houston to get. I think support is the area that people are like, yeah, that's where you need the most help. Off tank as well. So it kind of doesn't make sense, but also getting somebody like Hydration into the fold also doesn't hurt the Houston Outlaws. We still don't know what other moves that they're going to make. So as far as those two are concerned, as far as what they've done so far, I think it's a solid start as long as they move in the right direction with those other spots that I just highlighted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it is worth noting, too, that the Outlaws also did release one of their DPS players early in the week, and that was Arhan. So still don't know where he's going to end up, if anywhere, but, that seems like probably a better fit in contenders at this point, just based off of his performance that we have seen in the Overwatch League. So, for now, the Outlaws DPS line consists of 4 players. So you have Jake, Linkser, Dante, with now Hydration being that 4th player. So, we'll see where they're going to go from here, but Outlaws probably aren't going to be done yet. I would not be surprised if they do pick up an off tank, despite, technically already having two currently on the team, but we still don't have one that really specializes in multiple roles at this point,
Yeah.
which could be a pretty big boon on this team going forward. So still some issues to work out, but I'm feeling better about the Outlaws. I think they'll be able to figure it out. It's just a matter of what is their budget going to be left over at this point, because obviously at this point we still don't know salaries at all in the Overwatch League, and that's still been a hotly discussed topic here as of late, especially with some numbers being thrown out in the Sideshow League, which we'll talk about later on tonight. But it's a good start for the Outlaws, and I'm anxious to see how they're going to build around what they already have established on this team. Now, moving over to the Paris Eternal, we saw them recently release their head coach, Fei Fei, and they've actually already hired a new head coach, and they've turned to the San Francisco Shock and 9K, who, before that, he was at one point coaching on their academy team, Energy Esports. So he joined the Shock back in May of 2018. And, right now, like Eternal, they have really not made a ton of choices in regards to the free agency market. We haven't seen them do anything with team options or anything like that. But there's not a lot to work with right now on this coaching staff, because right now 9K is the only one. Like, I know Seda could still potentially return if he doesn't get any bites in regards to the free agency market, but there's no guarantee on that. So we're still expecting more moves to be made from the Paris Eternal. But I still feel like there's a lot to be said about, the crusty school of coaching at this point. This is not the first person we have seen that has been kind of under his wing get promoted to a really good spot. We've seen it with Harsha, now we see it with 9K. And, he's putting all of these people in prime position, and, I'm curious, is Junkbuck at any point going to, shift gears to another team for maybe another potential head coach position? Because this is something that we see time and time again, especially, when you draw parallels to, the NFL, whether it's, an offensive coordinator or even defensive, after, a championship winning season. But, it kind of makes you wonder, will the addition of 9K lean into maybe Paris picking up some Korean talent, or are they going to stick to what they feel like could work in the EU powerhouse, which has kind of been snuffed out at this point? Even, going back to some of the interregional competitions that we've seen here as of late.
It's funny that you mentioned the NFL too, because one of my first thoughts of all this is oh, so we have the crusty tree, the coaching tree. We're starting to get coaching trees coming out of this. And I was I've been thinking in my head, I'm okay, which tree is Harsha on? Is he on the crusty one, or is he on the Vancouver? Just things like that are going to be things that we kind of look at. And we're seeing that trend from the NFL as well, where if you're a team that wins a championship, your assistant coaching staff is going to get picked apart because people are going to take them on as head coaches because they want to try and capture some of that magic that your team had. So looking at it from that perspective, it's kind of an odd thing anyway. But as far as Paris Eternal is concerned, getting somebody like 9K obviously is good. I do think that there's still some coaching talent out there. I think 9K would be somebody you'd probably have on a lot of these lists just because of before he had gotten picked up by Paris. As far as Paris too, for needing more coaches is better. It just is. Not too many, but you don't want 9K doing everything himself. You don't need a Tyrong situation where the guy is sleeping, eating, and breathing at the Houston practice center and not able to leave because he's literally the only person who can do anything.
Yeah, and you also don't want to go the Sky Foxes route when you end up having 40 people listed on Wikipedia.
Yes. Exactly. So you've got to find that balance. So as far as Paris though, this isn't a bad first option to have as your head coach. But for Paris, there's so many other things that I feel need to be addressed, especially with their rosters. So I think having the coach first is important. Self-evaluation is a really important thing, I think, in Overwatch, and something that doesn't get talked about enough is evaluating your own talent. And you need to be able to do that. So I think that's a very good start, is having 9K just see what he has and then working with the management to figure out, okay, what do these players are we going to keep around? What do we really need for this team? Because Paris was an enigma last year of sorts. Like they would kind of look good on a couple, in a couple different games, and then they were just absolutely terrible. I don't know if you necessarily put that on the coaching staff. So, and if you look at it too, for Paris, the name is escaping me, but their coach was already picked up uh, from last year. Fifi was already been picked up. So it's one of those things where it's like, okay, obviously other people have a little bit higher thoughts on Fifi than Paris did, and if he's getting picked up that quick after he gets released, like that there's something to be said about that, and like really their talent is something that I'm really curious about too.
Yeah, so and if there's one thing we've learned from the offseason, it's that teams are not afraid to make changes. There are teams that are just completely overhauling their roster. Some teams like shipping out like fan favorites that their brand has really been built around, which we'll get into. So it's really been interesting to see who is going like completely rebuild and blowing up their roster, and who's trying to stick with what has been working for them so far, even if in some of these cases, like for the Gladiators, for instance, like there's been a lot of reports, a lot of rumors about what's been going on with them. They've been making a lot of changes, both in and out, so we'll talk about that here in just a bit. But man, like, there's one team in particular today that I know released a lot of players in Boston, so, whew, man. We'll see how many of those players actually get picked up, since they seem to kind of be like the farm system for the Overwatch League at this point. But from Boston, we go from them over to New York, of course. They're what's supposed to be like the sports rival, not so much in the Overwatch League just because of how drastic these two teams are. But following 2 seasons on being on the New York Excelsior, we have Meko's contract coming to an end, and New York did not re-sign Meko to a new contract. So, Meko, this was one of the cornerstones of NYXL, even dating back pre-Overwatch League when the team was Luxury Watch Blue. And this was a team that didn't really have any other off-tank option unless they wanted to, like, field Nene on, like, his prior role, but they didn't really do that a whole lot. So he was always seeing a play time, minus when we saw a lot of Sombra play coming into the Overwatch League when D.Va wasn't seeing as much play. But this is the second departure from the NYXL at this point, after they declined to pick up Flower for, the next season. But, when we're talking about name recognition in the free agency market at this point, like, we know how hot of a commodity tanks are in general, let alone the off-tank spots, but, to me, there's a lot of big names out there, but in regards to off-tanks, Meko is by far the biggest name that is available. So, it really makes you question, like, was this solely based on the amount of money that Meko was looking for, and that's why New York decided to decline them? And if that's the case, then who's going to be able to throw the money his way? Because Meko, when all is said and done, like when you look back at his stats, when you compare him to some of the other off-tanks in the league, he has been Mr. Consistency, regardless of what tank he has been playing. And, to me, like, this is definitely going to be someone that's going to be at the top of a lot of teams' lists, assuming that they're not trying to, kind of like scrape the bare minimum when it comes to the contract expenses for 2020.
I agree. I don't see how Meko isn't like at the top of almost everyone's list as far as off tanks are concerned, or even if you're just making a list of tanks, you'd probably put him above certain players. Even if you're just looking at main tank and off tank, you probably just, because of the talent and the ability, consistency, and everything else that he's brought to the Overwatch League. It's such a weird thing to see for sure. Obviously, like that's something that a lot of Overwatch fans have not been able to get used to, is somebody of this caliber on this storied team just kind of go out and not when they're down, like not when they're not at the peak of their powers. Like Meko is somebody you arguably can say is still a really good player. So when you think of it from that point of view, it does get a little bit weird, because New York has been so consistent with these players, and we hear about how important synergy is in Overwatch, and we just see it because team play is more important than just flat out skill. Because if it was flat out skill, London would be one of the best teams every time. Wasn't the case this year for sure, when we had teamwork become much more important as far as the Overwatch League is concerned. So when you think of Meko, you think of everything that you want in that off tank. And to me, the place that makes the most sense is a place that is going to have probably almost every Korean player that they can possibly have, and every Korean player is going to want to go there in the Seoul Dynasty. I think that's maybe where he's going to go. I don't see why he wouldn't. I don't see why they wouldn't want him, even to just give some more competition. Like Seoul may end up being the most competitive roster that we end up seeing as far as 4 positions.
Right. Yeah, it's absolutely crazy too, and of course, Seoul has been kind of like making their own power moves, which we're actually gonna save until like the main discussion, just because the rumored deal is like so monumental, like it kind of makes everything else like pale in comparison. Like it's just one of those things, because this one, at least with the Seoul one, I feel like there's more truth to it, primarily just because it is a Wolf bomb, and Jacob Wolf hasn't let us down on the Overwatch front. But there were a lot of other shenanigans that kind of happened over this past week. One of which was kind of leaked on Sideshow stream, which kind of like made this huge topic on, competitive Overwatch. A lot of people were trying to question whether or not, this was just a giant debate by Sideshow, because like you had Custa and Neptuna both, on camera talking about, off-season moves. Names are being thrown around that were free agents, people that were under contract, some dollar figures were thrown out as well. And of course, Custa, being such a good actor, was the one that was like front and center right in front of the camera. So a lot of people were kind of speculating like, okay, it's a debate. And then, we have the Game House coming out with a report talking about some of their sources saying like they've confirmed the legitimacy of a lot of these acquisitions that we heard about on, this video, which was, a little bit over 2 minutes long. But there's
I'm inclined to believe Connor too, by the way. Just to point that out.
I am absolutely on board with you on that too as well. And it's just, when you look at how much was said in this video, there's a lot to kind of take in for such a short video. So, just to give you guys the bullet points, and I'll get your thoughts on, the stuff after. Here's some of the stuff that was disclosed on this video. So the Dallas Fuel were interested in trading Closer for Custa, but Closer was too expensive, so that deal didn't happen. Dallas Fuel have reportedly signed Gamzu from the Shanghai Dragons, and they threw out a number of like 240K. We don't know if there's any truth to that number, but anytime we see a number, like it's always interesting to see like, okay, who's getting lowballed, who do we think is actually worth that much? Because like obviously right now the only thing that we know about for sure was season 1 Sinatra at that point, and that's basically it. So outside of that, a lot of movement out of LA. So the Gladiators had acquired OGE from the Dallas Fuel, and then they are looking to sign Space from the Valiant for big bucks. Space obviously probably knows what he's worth. I mean, he's only one of the best Western tanks available out there.
The best Western tank, probably, or off tank, I should say.
Absolutely. And I'm pretty sure he's still under contract, so they had to pay up a lot to make that move happen. Yeah. And then looking at their counterpart in LA, that being the Valiant, they're looking to go low budget in 2020, reportedly not paying players over $60,000. Custa is still on that team, so take that for what you will. Like, I don't know if Custa should be paid that low, just based on, him being like the leader aspect of that team. And if they're shipping out so many pieces or just releasing pieces, he's still pretty much your cornerstone on that team, both in the public eye, as well as just, just on the front lines on this team. And
backbone, you could even say.
Absolutely. And outside of that, we have Toronto Defiant, who, honestly, like, if everything we've heard about Toronto ends up being true, are probably going to be fan favorites by a lot of teams. Wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of people transition from Gladiators fans over to Defiant fans, because it looks like the Defiant have signed Surefour, which is another big move. And there was also talk of Defiant not wanting to trial Neptuno, who is a free agent, due to fear of toxicity. So kind of a lot to take in here. Gladiators, a lot of people were kind of worried about due to hydration moving, Surefour being a free agent, Void being a free agent, Roar getting signed by Washington Justice. A lot of moving parts. And then you hear about them picking up space, so it's just like an OGE. Like, these are some pretty big moves, but, it's something to be said about moving away players that are technically stars to your brand, and I want to see how that is going to impact just the overall health and state of the brand, especially looking at things like the Twitch donations that we see getting tracked throughout the season. So I wonder how much of a blow it's going to be on that front. Because, a lot of people don't. I'm not gonna say a lot of people don't attach themselves to the teams. Obviously, you have people that attach themselves to players, and then you have the fan base that attaches themselves to teams. So I just want to know where that split is for such a big name like Surefour now that he's moving over to Toronto to play for Canada at this point.
That's a good question too, because Gladiators still are making some moves though. Whereas you think of fan favorites though, they're losing Surefour, but they're getting space in return and a couple other players. OGE is also a big name that people love. So the Gladiators, I don't think will feel that as much as maybe the Dallas Fuel, where OGE was the guy. Think about the homestand. Who was it everybody cheered for? It was OGE. That was the dude. So I think on certain teams it will have a little bit more of an aspect. Maybe Toronto rises in the ranks quite a bit with all of the players that they're acquiring. These are all people that that are just it's funny because everybody's man, they're losing such a in gods, they're losing gods that's so much of a personality. But it's oh, well, now you've got agilities, you've got who's not a personality per se, but people love him. Nevix, another person that people just have this endearing just because of everything they hear about him. Surefour is that personality that you sort of look for, and they still have Mangachu as well. So Toronto is a team that I see as far as the personality part rising, and also just the talent that they're bringing onto this team. It's really going to be fun to see what they end up doing, because this is a team that people might look at a little bit differently than the roster that they had last year. Still keeping that mixed roster too, which is going to be fun.
Yeah, and I keep laughing because I keep seeing them picking up all of these Team Canada World Cup team players. And it just gets me thinking, man, when are they going to go out and pick up Crimzo? And I'm well, they still have Neko on the team. And then people are oh, well, but what about XQC? It's not going to happen, guys. He's making way too much money off of stream and just watching reaction videos, probably pulling in close to $1 million a month or whatever at this point. He's not coming back, so don't even think about it at this point. But yeah, Toronto is looking pretty stacked. But, I want to see them pick up more Canadian talent, because you look at some of the names that are still out there from Canada's front. There's still a lot of good pieces that they could fit in, but unfortunately for Crimzo, if you have Neko and Kariv, not looking too good.
Pretty good. I mean, maybe not Toronto, but it'll be criminal if a team doesn't pick up Crimzo. I think Crimzo was one of those players that showed at Gauntlet he deserves an opportunity at the very least to be on an Owl team. So I'm hoping still for Crimzo, especially if we get him playing really well again at World Cup. If somebody doesn't pick him up at that point, if they haven't already announced their pickup of him, we better get out the pitchforks for this guy, because it's just going to be ridiculous. The fact that especially when you talk about a Western support, this is something that people want. Crimzo fits the bill. Just somebody do it already, please.
I'm sure there's going to be a little bit of an uproar, though, if he gets picked up before Sleepy does. Because you know how many Sleepy backers there are out there.
Sleepy is that weird. He's an enigma at this point, it feels because it's you think you have such high hopes for him. He goes to Washington, he plays kind of well, and then he just disappears. And you're what happened? And then he doesn't beat out Raucus for the World Cup. And it's, it's different. It's not bare hands this time. It's Ball In, who I think we're going to talk about some of the things she's done already. I know we probably have talked about some of it because she's done a lot. I'm excited to see what she's doing in Washington, because she clearly has a plan, and she's really putting her fingerprints on that team. So when you can't even get on the person that people hold in high regard to for Ballin with just oh, she's very respected by the players and all this other stuff, and yet Sleepy still can't do it. So I don't know.
Right, so continuing our discussion on the Defiant, the other piece that came out based on recent reports from Connor was that the Defiant are looking to sign Nevix, who is a free agent. So the Outlaws were also in the run-in, but weren't able to match whatever the offer was from Toronto at this point. But this is a team that is going to have a complete overhaul. So right now, the primary thing that this team is missing is a main tank, because they did release, Sharik and Yakpun in recent weeks. So, right now, looking at the team options that they still have to weigh in on, you have Logix as a team option, Mangachu is also a team option, as well as Ivy. They got Kariv, Neko is a team option, and I know Roki they moved to a two-way contract. But man, I'm just trying to think of who would be a good fit in regards to main tank on this team out of who's available right now in the pool. But, with the big names that they've already had that are coming into this team now, you basically go from a team that, I know initially people were not really expecting a whole lot from Toronto. Now all of a sudden you're going to have, I don't want to say rockets on their backs at this point to try to shoot them to the moon, but there are going to be higher expectations put on this team based on who they're signing. And for Nevix, this is an easy signing. You have someone who has been able to fit the bill, and while he might not be necessarily a starter all the time because, the Shock were that deep at pretty much every position that they had, this is a perfect opportunity, and, this is new grounds. Toronto is basically going to go from this team that was kind of an afterthought at times, and then they go out, they sign a lot of these contenders players that a lot of people have been backing since the OG days of Overwatch, and now they're bringing in popular players like Agilities and Surefour, and now all of a sudden you have that name recognition behind this team. So how far that's going to be able to take them, I don't know, but I just want to see who they're going to slot alongside Nevix. Maybe they'll try to go out and make another deal with Shock. Maybe they try to bring Smurf over to try to keep some sort of synergy on this team on the front line. I don't know at this point, but it's going to be an interesting week.
It's one of those things too, though. If you're the San Francisco Shock, are you giving up Smurf? He played so well, and we know that Super's him and Smurf. It's just depending on what main tank is needed. But I don't think you give up Smurf. You'd have to do a lot, I feel, to get him off of San Francisco. I feel you would maybe be better off just dipping into the contenders pool, because I feel as far as main tank is concerned, there's a lot of really good main tanks that we saw at Gauntlet that can potentially fill in, that aren't just good at Orisa too. I think that's something to point out as well. Is obviously these guys were showing out on Orisa, but a lot of these main tanks can play other roles as well, and had been. I don't know, their roster isn't as Korean dominated as before, but Alpha's a really good main tank. That's somebody to consider, I think, but for any team, right? Just talent wise, he's somebody you have to be taking a look at. Just that's just one too. And Gator, I know he's on a two-way contract, but if you're trying to pull somebody from who's a Western player over in to work with your team, if you're Toronto, Gator's not a bad option either. There's more than just those two. Those are just two that come to mind at first, just because of how well their teams performed and how well they performed at Gauntlet.
Absolutely. Now, with that being said, there were a number of other changes that we saw in regards to just coaching staff. So bear with me, there is quite a bit here, and we'll circle back. So we do have updates on the Dallas Fuel coaching staff. So they have released their assistant coach, Damon, and we do know that Arrow will return as the head coach for the Fuel in 2020. For the Hanzhou Spark, they've released their assistant coach, Supreme. London Spitfire also made a ton of moves in regards to coaches. They signed Twinkle, Awesome Guy, and Pavane as assistant coaches. We'll circle back to that one, because that one, to me, is definitely the biggest one out of anything we're going to talk about. And then they also promoted Agape to be the head coach for the Spitfire for 2020. New York, as you probably guessed, because, Pavane is on London, they parted ways with him. He was the New York Excelsior head coach these past few years. We already mentioned Eternal letting go of Feifei, and they also released their assistant coach in Kai, who honestly probably not going to be able to catch a break ever, it seems like, in competitive Overwatch. Feels bad, man. And then, of course,
too much negativity attached to that dude's
there
name.
is
I feel bad for him.
a lot of baggage. And, Feifei did sign as a new head coach for the Toronto Defiant. But anyway, circling back, so Pavane goes from New York to London, and, that's a pretty lucrative spot on New York. Empty spot, head coach position. Obviously, a lot of talk out of the gauntlet is coming from, Element Mystic. Rush has thrown his name into the field. And, it's very easy to slot Rush and Sparkle into a lot of these teams. But it's just a matter of, okay, who's creating the space on their rosters? Who makes the most sense? And, part of me really wants to believe that they're gonna go to Seoul Dynasty just based on geolocation. But I'm like, man, if they end up going to New York, that's gonna be a power move in itself. And it just seems like, London, they're doing a lot of stuff on their end. New York is kind of just trying to figure out, what the best way is to work in all of their talent, because that has been another, major thing just with how much overlap they have with such a deep DPS roster at this point. But to me, it speaks volumes that Pavane would go from a head coach position on New York to accepting an assistant coach spot for London at this point, knowing all of the murmurs surrounding the current state of the Spitfire and the moves that have yet to be made going out of that team.
There's a lot with London. London's the weird one, because before this happened, if you were to ask me where I thought Rush would fit in best, London was the team that I was thinking, because I didn't think Pavane was going to leave New York for one.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was man, London could really. There's the rumor swirling about Profit and Gesture, Sparkle and Rush. You can also pull over from that team Hanbin. It was okay, this is where it makes sense for all the Element Mystic guys to go who are able to go, because there are a couple players I think that might be underage still for a little bit. But regardless, that was the team. I was okay, London, they're making the moves to do that. And then you start to see some of these other moves, and now it's okay, now it's New York who's that team where the Element Mystic guy is going to. Makes the most sense. Sparkle, I don't know. Sparkle to me, yes, he's a very good DPS player on two heroes that we got to see him play the most, which are his two best. But it's the other guys on that team that are more intriguing to me than Sparkle. And don't get me wrong, Sparkle's an incredible talent, but it's those other players, especially their tank line, I think is something that didn't get talked about a whole lot, who are, I think, both eligible in Hanbin and Alpha.
Yeah, I'm looking at the spreadsheet right now with the contenders' birthdays. The only one on Element Mystic not eligible in Season 3 is Takoyaki, who was their backup main tank.
Yeah, I was going to say, and Takoyaki didn't really play. Mm-hmm. So this just makes so much sense. Where Element Mystic could be, this could be the landing spot is New York. That really is what it can feel like. But as far as for London's, the concern for London, it's so weird to go from a head coach to an assistant coach. Obviously, maybe this is something that Pavane felt that just made more sense for him. Maybe he felt like he didn't have that responsibility, which is why going from one team to another, he's okay with taking an assistant coach job. Because as somebody who was a head coach and had my position taken away from me by my old college coach, it's a hard thing to do. But when you're in your early 20s and your college coach is the one who's taking over for you, you kind of let things go, and you but it's still hard. So for Pavane, it's still going to be an adjustment, right? It is not going to be an easy thing, but it's another adult in the room, which is maybe something London needs. I feel like when London started to go downhill, in my opinion, and there's no proof of this or anything, but is when Susie Kim left. That, she was the adult in the room. She seemed, when she was general manager of the team, to sort of have that team under control. Just the way she talked about the team, you kind of felt that way. She she was the mom of the team, sort of, the person who really kept this team in check is what she was.
Right. And obviously we'll talk about the Cheshire Prophet rumors that have been circling around ESPN and all of that, which can be monumental and really kind of shift the landscape of the Korean teams altogether. But let's talk about some of the other knowns out there right now in regards to the free agent market. So Boston, they declined a ton of team options earlier in the week, and they've released Aimgod, Alamon, Persia, RCK, Kelix, and Stellar. Honestly, it would have been quicker for me to name who was still on the team than tell you who was released, since there's only 4 people. But that is besides the point at this time. So they've been busy, and of course, with Boston, we gotta talk about the way that they approach business. This is a team that so likes to go towards those lesser represented regions, out of contenders, sign people towards minimum contracts and ship him off for bigger money at this point. And looking at this team, or out of these teams' releases, there are a couple names that might be more appealing to the eye. Aimgod would probably be the most sought after name out of the list. I think RCK's stock at this point, at least in 222, isn't as high as it was prior to that. He definitely had his fair share of issues when he was just going back to playing the off-tank position for the Uprising. But, right now they still have both main tanks on their roster. When it comes to fusions, Axiom is still on there. And then they have Blase and Color Hex for their DPS. So I don't know who Boston's going to be looking at. It might be out of Australia, it might be South America again, it might be from some country you've never heard of at this point. We honestly don't know with Boston. But, this team all the time screams, we're going to find people who, might not be household names, and we'll try to sell them off for bigger money. But, if the Patriots have taught us anything, they're going to keep finding people, and, it's really just the next number up. Like, who's going to be the next person to get the call up, and we'll see how they fit into the mold for Boston. But if you're ever on the Uprising, you can't really feel like you have any sort of job security with the amount of movement.
And 6 players is only several players, apparently, too, in the eyes of the Boston Uprising. So, I don't know. Like 60% of your team is several players. That, to me, was the wildest thing about their tweet, was like, yeah, we've released several players. Like, no, you released more than half of your team. This is not several. This is a lot of players. So, just from that standpoint, it already gives me something rubbing the wrong way with Boston, which has happened a lot with Boston before this. And after this, I'm sure it'll be the same thing. So maybe it's also good for those players to get out of there. Like, it might be for some of them. RCK, just speaking on him, I really hope he gets back into contenders and can focus on one role, with now that 2-2 role lock is going the way that it is. Because talent-wise, I still believe that he's a talented player. I just think he was in a bad situation with what he was practicing and then what became needed for an Overwatch League team. So I hope that he still gets an opportunity to play on at least an academy team or something, maybe put him on a 2-way contract to just let the guy get back into a groove, because that's a dude whose confidence has to be shot after the season that he had, after such high highs he started with too. So as far as he's concerned, but Boston, who knows who they're going to go after? Like, are they going to pull their, you think maybe contenders players that people don't expect to get pulled up is something that they could do? Like, there's so many different options for how Boston works. Like, we don't even know where they're going to pull players from. And
right. Like, to me, I wouldn't be surprised if Boston looks at the Pacific and maybe looks at Patafan, who had an awesome performance at the Gauntlet. But there's the other part of me that's just oh man, Boston is usually the last case scenario that I want to see someone sign with at this point.
Well, and Patafan too would have to be on Uprising Academy as well, because Patafan is 16, so he still has a whole nother year before he's going to become OWL eligible. But if you're talking about a player to work into your system and then sell him off, Like, yeah, that totally sounds like a Boston move, right? Like, throw him on Uprising Academy. He does well there. He turns 18. Somebody needs him. They're going to pay him a lot of money, more than likely, if he does well. Yep, I could totally see Boston doing something like that with a guy like Patafan for their academy team.
Yeah, and the other part of me just feels bad for Selder, who, you know, was picked up very late in the season, you know, even towards stage 4 at this point. Now he's released, looking for a new home. But, you know, just looking at the field, I'm just looking at all the releases from this past week. Boston nearly has half. Boston released 6, the rest of the league released like 8 players. So just to put that in comparison, guys. So moving on to the Houston Outlaws, they did release Arhan, which we mentioned, you know, prior in the show. But they also re-signed Boink for the 2020 season. So, you know, circling back, you know, we were talking about support being one of the issues that, you know, the Outlaws are going to have to be looking at. You know, like, this is one of them that I was just like, okay, like, I still feel like there are much better options out there, but, you know, Boeing just has, Houston is in this weird spot, I will say, you know, because when you look at this team, this is America's team, so to speak, you know, kind of like the Dallas Cowboys in a sense. There are a lot of household names that people will look at. Yeah. There's a lot of personalities on this team, so it kind of boils down to the fact, like, how much of your identity do you want to lose? And to me, like, honestly, everyone at support line was expendable. Like, I was not expecting them to have any re-sign-ins on that end. Maybe outside of Raucus, just because, like, out of all of the supports, he's usually still the go-to in regards to social media presence and all of that. Boink, not so much.
Yeah. It doesn't make sense from that aspect. It also doesn't make sense from, like, a play aspect either. Like, Boink didn't exactly do anything to make you go, wow, they've got to make sure they keep this guy. So, yeah, maybe he means more in the locker room. Maybe that's where his value is. Maybe internally he gets the most value for this team. Those are things we don't really know. Maybe he's the David Ross. For those of you who may know who David Ross was for the Cubs, he was a really big part of what helped them win a World Series. Also might end up being the manager now, but we're not talking about baseball. Nobody cares about baseball. I don't even care about baseball. So I'm not even a Cubs fan either. I'm a Sox fan. So, like, talking about the Cubs, who cares? But maybe that's where Boink has his value. Maybe there's something like that. Also, he's probably not an expensive option.
Right.
So if he's somebody that you plan on just having challenged for a position, maybe it works out. Maybe it's not a bad one. It's just it is, especially when you look at the hydration and the Harsha move, like, it just doesn't sort of fit with where we were seeing Houston go with some of these moves. So that's the only thing I could think of as to why they would want to keep him, is cheap, and he means a lot to the team.
Yep, and moving into LA, quite a bit of movement, both from the Gladiators and the Valiant. So looking at the Gladiators' releases this past week, they released both Reaper and Roar. Roar did find a new home in Washington, so we'll touch on that in here in just a little bit. But in regards to up-in contracts, they did re-sign both Big Goose and Shaz, so 2/3 of, you know, the Finnish trio still intact for the Gladiators in 2020. And, you know, for all of the murmurs we've heard, all of the rumors, them re-signing the support line was absolutely top priority for me, for this team in particular. And, you know, it's great for my fantasy Overwatch League teams, because Shaz was definitely locking things down throughout the entirety of the season, so I'm happy to see him remain a Gladiator. And I have to say, like, I really appreciated the social media post when it came to Big Goose. You know, making fun of the Duck game. Yeah, that was spot on.
That was really good. I thought that was a good move from them. I've watched some of that game play too, so, like, that's just knowing, like, what's going on and doing that, and just making sure that you can, you know, keep, like, they're so good with their social media. That's all I'm trying to say, is, like, they are so good with it.
And especially at, like, giving people heart attacks, you know.
Right. Yes. Oh my God. Yes, that was a good one for sure.
Maybe not good for everyone's health. Kusher's asking, any rumors about Void yet? Not that I have seen. Void is a free agent. But like obviously if they're signed in space, probably not gonna keep Void on the roster. I can't imagine. And speaking of tanks, we also have to take a look at the LA Valiant, who did release 2 tanks in McGravy and Fact Fiction. Now, this is another one, when we're talking about takes, like, Fact Fiction has kind of always been, like, the Swiss Army knife on a lot of these teams lately, and he's been performing well, and no matter what he seems to be doing, like, he's not securing his job season to season, and it's so unfortunate, because there's so much talent there. But this is a veteran presence. This is going to be an easy signing for other teams out there who are in need of a main tank. Maybe even Toronto, possible destination for him based off of their moves so far. McGravy is kind of a weirder one. I know when they were doing like all the Mayhem Academy call-ups, it wasn't necessarily like a standout name most of the time, and he didn't really see a ton of play in regards to the Overwatch League stage, so probably gonna go back to contenders. It would be my guess in his case, but Fact Fiction I definitely expect to get picked up for the Overwatch League again for 2020.
Yeah, McGravy's the one to me that he's a good player, but how good of a player is he? Like, we didn't get to see him much in Overwatch League. Like, he just keeps getting moved from team to team. Like, Florida booted him, but we know why Florida booted him. He never really worked his way in that much with LA, so I think that he's going back to contenders to try and work his way back up. It's super unfortunate for him, but like, he didn't do anything to prove himself, and when you're behind space, it's hard to really get any opportunities. And I mean, he still played a little bit, so maybe it's enough for a team to take another chance on him. But I don't see it happen. I just don't for him. The rest of the moves too. It's just LA in general is like wild with some of the things that are happening, especially if these rumors for the Gladiators are true. Because like you said, re-signing your support line is great, and now this tank lineup that they're bringing in with OG and Space, like, that's a tank lineup that I didn't know I wanted, but now I want it. So whoever they got playing DPS, like, you've got some good tanks to play with, more than likely. It's going to be fun as long as OG is like in a good spot. So that's always one of the key things.
Well, we'll see whether or not Decay lives up to the hype, because he kind of simmered down last season, despite the bidding wars that kind of ensued on his front. But I do want to touch back up really quick on Dallas Fuel with that potential Gamzu sign-in, and I want to know how much of that money was put towards Gamzu versus his dog and having that presence on stage, because let's be real, like, that's the real star out of that duo for a lot of people anyway.
There's a lot of people who are probably like super hurt on Shanghai too, because like, people loved, well, just how Shanghai fans are anyways, like, they're very invested in the players, but like, people loved the dynamic between Gamzu and Grigori. So like, the fact that that's now broken up, I'm sure there's a lot of very heartbroken people that are, well, at least they're not heartbroken yet, because we don't know if it's for sure a thing, but more than likely it is from what we've been told. So there's probably a lot of people who are like, please don't let it be true. Please don't let Gamzu go off of Shanghai. So that's a lot of money for Gamzu. Like, he is a very good player, and also a very good person behind the scenes player from everything that I've ever heard. And this is not just from his time in Overwatch. This is going back to him as a player in League of Legends. It was the same way. So for those who don't remember or don't know, Gamzu used to be a pro player in League of Legends, a pretty decent player when he was playing League as well. So this is a guy who's been around a couple of games and just knows his way around. It's a very good person to sort of have as part of this, as part of any team. And seeing that too, you have to wonder what else Dallas is going to do if this is true. Like, if you're bringing Gamzu in, are you going, not that you need to go more Korean with him because he does speak English, but are you going to be trying to bring more players in to play around him and closer? Like, is that the way that they're going to start going? That's something that I'm really curious to see. I know they want to stay Western, but doesn't mean you can't have a couple more Korean players.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Moving on to the Philadelphia Fusion, they did release Neptuno earlier in the week. So Battle Mercy no longer on the Fusion. But right now, this has kind of been overshadowed by all of the Carpe rumors and, whether or not, they'll try to reunite the Fusion Uni support duo of Elk and Alarm. Obviously, there's a lot of talk on that front, but then you still have Boombox, who's under contract. And then there's the distraction of Sato, being under contract, all of that. But, Neptuno, we heard in, the Sideshow video, he might be having issues getting, trials or just offers if he's toxic. But, take that with a grain of salt at this point. But do you expect Neptuno to still be in the run-in for the Overwatch League at this point? Because, he's starting to get up there, and it's not like we're seeing a ton of Mercy play in the Overwatch League as of late.
Neptuno is still one of those players held in a pretty good regard, though, as far as his ability. So I don't know. I think having a Mercy player is still important. It's just a matter of what team is going to be willing to take on the personality that now the rumors are swirling about the fact that he's toxic and all this other stuff that is reportedly out there. Those are the things I think that you have to be more concerned if you're Neptuno than your ability on Mercy, because if you play a hero in the game better than anybody else or better than pretty much everybody else, there's going to be a room for you on a roster somewhere. But the personality part could be enough to dissuade teams. There's some teams that for sure won't even look at him, with the fact that even if it's a rumor, it could be not. This might not even be true. We don't even know. When rumors like this happen, though, it does get harder to land yourself a spot, and it also costs you money too. Even if you do get picked for a team. So I think he's still going to end up somewhere. I don't see how he doesn't at least end up in contenders at the very least. I think he's still somebody that people are like, you know what? He's really good at this one thing, and that one thing can be really important depending on how nerfs and buffs go. So I do think that there's still enough there for people to at least take a chance on it. It's sort of like the NFL. There are certain teams that will take that chance.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to agree with Kasha here, who says take him over Boink for the Outlaws 100%. I fully support that. But, even regardless of whether or not he's toxic, there are players who have had that redemption arc on other teams that haven't had an issue getting signed. A primary example of that being Rascal from the San Francisco Shock, who really had, stand-up performances throughout the season with Baptiste coming into play. Even got to see him play quite a bit of Projectile later on in the season. So, even if the murmurs about that are true or not, I don't think it's going to just completely limit his chances of finding a spot, whether it's starting or not, in the Overwatch League at this point. But moving on to Toronto, again, we talked about all of the rumored stuff, but they did release Yakpun. So, Toronto without a main tank at this point. And then Washington was the other team who made a sign-in, and they picked up Roar after he was released by the Gladiators. So now you have Justice, who have two main tanks. Obviously, they still have the Swedish duo for Elivote and Lolsish, and now they have Roar. So, I know a lot of people initially for this one in particular were kind of like, well, do you really need a backup main tank? And, we saw how integral having backups are. Just look at the Shock, look at the Titans. That's really all you need to know at this point.
That's all you need to know, and all you need to know, too, is Ballin is sort of handcuffed to Lolsish and Elivote because they were just brought in towards the end of the year, right, maybe a month or so before she took over as general manager. So she really has had no choice as far as having those two players on her team. They're under contract unless you're trading them away, which they're unproven. They haven't played in forever. There's not going to be many teams that are going to be willing to take a chance on that duo. So keep them on your team. Bring in somebody that Ballin knows personally, spent a lot of time around because of where she was as far as being part of the Gladiators for as long as she was. bring somebody in who can bring competition to that position and also brings a different aspect to the main tank as well. Like it makes sense from that sort of perspective when you think of it from the general manager and Ball in and just everything she's done so far too. Like clearly she has trimmed everything off of this team that she didn't evaluate at a high level herself. Anything that she seems to think is worth keeping around, she has kept around. Like there's clearly been a lot of self-evaluation of the Washington Justice done by Ball in to make these decisions. And that's why I'm really like I'm excited to see what she ends up doing and how good this team ends up being because of it, because she really clearly has a plan and she also knows what she's looking for, it seems like.
I appreciate the fact that top quality memes were near the top after they re-signed Stratus through 2020 and 2021, because between Corey and Stratus, I mean that's pretty much all you can handle at that point. So I'm glad on that front. But we know Void is a free agent at this point, so that's another potential Gladiators or ex-Gladiator signing that we could see for the Justice, which would make a ton of sense. You would keep that synergy that was already built. And, if Elivote and Losish doesn't work out, you at least have a duo that, you've been around, you're comfortable with already, and you're not having to basically swap people in and out and trying these different combinations at that point.
And they're a solid duo, too. Like, this isn't a duo that was on a team that struggled mightily. Like, both seasons for the LA Gladiators, they were top 6. So you know that these are players that can adapt to the different metas that have come through Overwatch. Sure, they haven't been great at every single one, but they've always been at least serviceable. So you have that. The higher ceiling is obviously your European duo, right? Like I think that's a for sure thing. But the floor is probably higher for those two tanks that you have from the LA Gladiators. So it's a nice, good little combination that for Ball in, it gives her a safety net with those two if they don't end up panning out. Because as far as evaluating, those are probably the two hardest players for her to evaluate on that team because they just didn't play in Overwatch League. So how do you really evaluate them when they sat for, I don't even know how many months it's been since they've played in like an official game too. Like I don't remember when their last Contenders game was that they played in, but it had to be, I mean, gosh, was it Atlantic Showdown? Was that the last time? Or was it even before that? Like it's been a while is the point though. Right. And then of course you have that as far as evaluating, like Corey and Stratus make a lot of sense. I think they're going to add more as far as DPS, but those two is like a base start. I think it makes a lot of sense to keep them on Washington.
Yeah, I'm just double checking, and it was in fact Atlantic Showdown.
I thought so.
Which was in early June. So it's gonna season starts in February, guys. So it's a 8-month layover.
Yeah, a very long layover for two guys who, like, they have a lot of promise for sure. There's no doubt about that. Like, Angry Titans still did pretty well at Atlantic Showdown. So, like, yeah, there's a lot of potential in those two, but you can't rely on two guys that haven't had the opportunity to actually play. So, I think the team that I've enjoyed the most of how they're going about things is Washington, where when you have a new general manager take over and that just really makes it their own, like clearly she took out anything that didn't sort of fit with what she was looking for, and she's keeping things that she thinks will work with what was already there.
Right on, and that will lead into our main discussion, which, by the way, guys, I can say with 100% certainty, is not based on any personal biasness towards the team involved. And that is what's been going on with the Seoul Dynasty. So, guys, if you haven't heard, Seoul have been doing what we like to call power play moves at this point. So there was a recent report from Jacob Wolf, who is one of the ESPN staff writers, who was talking about a transfer that would send London Spitfires, Gesture, and Profit over to the Seoul Dynasty. So, of course, both Gesture and Profit were on that Championship Spitfire roster in the inaugural season. And, you have the Dynasty, who are basically coming out of a season overall with improvements when you look at their performance, both record-wise, also actually qualifying for stage playoffs and season playoffs, which is, an even bigger deal on that end. And, we're looking at the Dynasty, and we're expecting this team to be super aggressive during the free agency period, as, they are still, at this point, the only team being based in South Korea. Now, of course, that could change in the future, but for now, they are a prime location, especially with geolocation in the 2020 season, bringing in high interest from the Korean players. So, spots on Seoul are going to be pretty competitive and very sought after. So, we talked about all of the staffing changes with London, and right now we don't know what direction London is going to go in, which players they're pursuing, or anything like that. So it's kind of hard to kind of piece together where they're going to go on that end, but they still have Fury on that roster. They got Badosian. They got Krillin. I don't know if they're going to try to move forward with him. But, you're looking at the Dynasty right now, and they still have quite a few players that are under contract. Obviously, Jaehan, Toby, and Zunba have already been declared free agents at this point. So right now, when we're looking at the status of this team, players under contract include Fitz and Illicit for DPS. They got Hailey and Jexay for their tanks, and then Marvel and Michelle for tank line. But right now, the biggest question mark is the team option on Fleta. So, you talk about Fitz and Illicit, Prophet and Fleta potentially all being on the same team. Fitz, to me, is definitely the one that you would consider to be the trade bait. Like, we've seen pretty good performances from him. If Doomfist continues to be, pretty prominent, that gives him even more leverage in any sort of trade for money or anything like that. But for a long time, you have that lunatic high presence on the Seoul Dynasty, and now all of a sudden we got GC Busan coming in, so, there might be a little bit of a takeover coming in, but man, leading into geolocation, we always thought, okay, there's a legitimate chance that Seoul can kind of live up to that namesake, and they haven't quite been there at this point, but, if this is the first step, I am really excited to see what other moves this team is going to be make. Maybe with it, them being based in Korea, maybe Element Mystic or parts of Element Mystic will be prime, signings for them to make, because, they released KDG, they didn't re-up his contract, so they don't have a head coach. And, if they decide to let go of Fleta, Sparkle is definitely the biggest name DPS-wise in the free agent market. It's still a possibility, but there are a lot of, either potential promotions that we could see from Genji Esports that could fit right in. There's a lot of other...
Runaway yet?
Yeah, Runaway has a lot of options. You still have prominent hit scan players, on Element Mystic, XZI. Edison is still out there. There is so much talent out of Korea alone. Not even including just players that were released from teams during the off-season. But, man, it makes you feel good just seeing, we talk about Runaway initially getting picked up by the Titans, them being a super team at the time. And then we see the Shock kind of, doing their own thing. And now, Seoul starting to nudge away at that. And I couldn't be happier to see just the names being thrown out towards their direction at this point. And really, just knowing how aggressive they're being, the sky truly is the limit at this point, where it just feels like no name is off limits for the Dynasty.
That's how it feels, at least for Korean players. There's no name that's off limits. And if this trade of Gesture and Prophet does happen, I mean, if you have Prophet, Gesture, and Fleta as your DPS trio, that's a scary trio. That sure there's some overlap, but overlap in a good way. So I really do want to see that. And then if you look at Gesture and Marvel, I think those two complement each other as far as what main tanks that they can play. And then I think you can still just keep Michelle as your off tank. The support line is going to be the biggest question for them. Is where will they pull that support line? Do they pull it from Element Mystic like you're saying? Do they pull some of the Runaway guys? Do they pull from Gen G? You know, do we see some of those Gen G guys who we're thinking maybe they get their chance again, like as far as Gen G is concerned, like maybe we see Wooyall make his way back over. There's a couple of different options here for the Seoul Dynasty, and everything does seem to be on the table. Consider this though, because with London having some of these openings come up, maybe Runaway is the team where they push after it. Maybe they push for the Runaway players, because we know Runaway is still, sure, they finished in third. They still have a lot of desirable pieces that people are going to want. Like QOQ, I think, is still a very highly sought after piece that people are going to consider. Just their tank line in general, although Maggot, I believe, is still not old enough yet. I think he's got another year. But regardless, Runaway players to London Spitfire from this current generation of contenders. New York, their support Jonak, who is he really good friends with, who is now all of a sudden available. Rouge Hong, Lunatic High players going over to New York, and then maybe they grab a couple of those Element Mystic boys to join in as well. So then you have this weird Element Mystic, Lunatic High, and LW Blue Madman combination to then go against the other Eastern team that has the players that they were going against in their contenders in Runaway that are now on London. Like, it would be cool storylines if this sort of a thing happens. And then you have the Seoul Dynasty over in the West, who has all of these players that were kind of just pulled away from these other teams because they want to be into Korea. The storylines just from that, I would love to see happen, because I think it would just make for really good Overwatch, and it'd be some really good teams. And while we're at it, just just have both of the Lunatic High supports go over to New York to make that trio with Jonak. Like, why not, right? Why not? And just have it happen. Like, it would be fun. Just make my dreams become a reality.
And it's really crazy, because like when you look at Gen G, sure, they were the third seed out of Korea. Yes, it got eliminated by NA. But, you do have the redemption arc for Wooyall, as you mentioned. They still have Wookied on that roster. Glister is also another flex DPS option. I don't know if I would be sold on the supports. I feel like, based out of just Contenders Korea, you have a ton of options there. You got Myunbun, who had been, for a long time, targeted by Florida out of O2 as a potential flex support pickup. Alarm, honestly, is probably another big name. Who knows what the Fusion situation is going to be at this point, and Boombox is still under contract, so that kind of murks their support situation on whether or not you even promote him. But Alarm's probably the biggest name, at least in regards to just Zenyatta players out there. You have Lee Shae-gon, you have Gain Nanjin, you have Repel as another option from the Titans, who was on X6 prior to that. Hagopen is even potentially an option, because he kind of had a rebound performance out of Florida, of all teams. And, Aim God also released. So I think flex support-wise, if you're looking to sign Korean talent, you are absolutely okay with a majority of those options. But it's just a matter of what they're going to do with their DPS. Because Fleta has been a primary identity for this team. But, it's clear, they're not afraid to get rid of some of those cornerstone pieces with Jaehan and Toby out the door. So I don't know what direction they're going to go in, but there's so many options that you could just fit in and see this team suddenly push themselves into top 6, maybe even top 3, depending on who they end up getting. But it's so hard to craft what I would think would be the perfect roster at this point. For this
it's
team.
Like trying to pick the South Korean team for World Cup, right?
Basically.
That's basically what they get to do with Seoul right now. I think the thing that hurts the most is the fact that if you have Gesture and Fury do go to Seoul, is the fact that you think about, man, you don't get to see Jaehong and Toby get to work with a roster with that much talent. I think that's the thing that maybe hurts the most. As far as for me, as a guy who's been watching since season 1 of Apex, as far as their journey. So it's man, it's going to be really tough. I do still want to see where those two land up too. I really do believe that them to New York, Toby and Jaehong to New York, it feels like it's possible with how well they get along with Jonak. Like
Mhm.
just from that alone could be enough. Like I think it would be fun to see. Like you have the guy who idolized the one player now playing with him. Like that's every player's dream. And they already get along as friends anyways. Make it happen, New York. Make it happen.
I would absolutely love that. But if I were to cherry pick, I would look at Runaway at least with their support duo.
Yeah. Very good
Outside
support.
of that, like if somehow Soul ends up getting Meko, like you have 100% confidence in whatever tank duo, and that's not to like downplay how Marvell and Michelle played throughout the season for Soul. Obviously, Soul at times were incorporated into completely different rosters, being one of the few teams to actually be able to do that, let alone have great success with it. And they really proved themselves. But Meko's probably the big name in regards to off tanks, outside of Huyao, but. Part of me just wants to see that GC Busan takeover, just knowing the past history between them and Lunatic Kai, be like, oh no, not again!
That would be wild. The one thing though, with like when you talk about Marvell and Michelle too, I think to consider for this is that they still have a spot, even if you bring those other guys in.
Mhm.
That's just how good and how solid of players they are. It still feels like there's room for them on the roster, even if you bring these other players in. They do still have their place. Like I think that especially when you consider Gesture as part of Soul Dynasty, like there are picks that we know that he is way better on, and then things he's not good at all on. Like if you're talking about Reinhardt, who are you going to have play, Marvell or Gesture? Probably Marvell. So it's like there's a couple of things where you do still want to have somebody like Marvell on the team if you do end up getting Gesture, and if you end up getting Profit too. I mean, Michelle still probably stays your off tank, but if they do get Meko, like Meko and Michelle is an unfair like 1 and 2 off tank as well. Like, what in the hell if they do get that?
Yeah, it would be crazy. And, we can't undersell the geolocation aspect, too. Because there are going to be players out there who would be willing to take a pay cut just to play in Korea and just be
Yeah.
close to home.
Hometown discount.
And, well, for now, like, Seoul, only one in that position. Really, no one else can really make that move at this point. And with how much Korean talent there is in the league and just available as a whole, I mean, heck, even, like, more than half of the talent at the Gauntlet was Korean. So, it really speaks a lot about, like, where the path to pro scene is right now as well, from what we've been seeing from the top teams out there. So, right now, it's just prime picking if you were the Seoul Dynasty, so they kind of get a cherry pick wherever they want, and we'll see where they end up. But that Seoul Super Team is looking like it will come to fruition. It's just a matter of, can Seoul actually live up to that namesake that they stamped on their branding of being a dynasty? Because right now, they've made steps towards that, but the inaugural season was pretty much stumbling down the stairs. Season 2 felt a lot better. They got kind of like got on the moving platforms. But they're picking up speed. And we'll see where they go from this point. But just seeing all of the options out there, man, it just kind of makes your mouth water just knowing that this is the team that can put themselves in a position to really challenge the absolute best teams and not just kind of be playing essentially like third or fourth fiddle when you compare them to some of the other teams out there that are primarily Korean.
And one of the things that can determine this more than anything else is a pick for head coach for Seoul.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're still searching for a head coach. So that could be the determining factor more than anything else. Like I forgot they were still searching for a head coach. So if they get Rush, like you almost expect players from Element Mystic to come with him.
Right.
That could be one of the things that happens. Like that's another, like as far as like a Korean coach going somewhere right now, clearly the 2 spots are New York or Seoul. And then depending on who those coaches end up being will determine maybe where some of these players end up going. Like I think that is something to be pointed out as well that we need to be paying attention to see how some of these moves go, because obviously hometown is really important, but also being under a coach that also is really important to some players.
Absolutely, and we'll see, further down the line whether or not we see like a Busan team open up in regards to Korea further down the pipeline. But for now, Seoul is a primary location that you want to be for geolocation, and I think like we've hit up on all of the notes at that point on that team, but it's going to be an exciting couple of weeks and seeing whether or not they keep Fleta, and we'll see what moves they make at that point. But with that being said, LoBosco, I think it's time that we start to wrap up the show for tonight. So if you guys want to help us out, obviously the best thing to do is hop over on iTunes, let us know how we're doing. We appreciate any reviews thrown our way. That will offer us insight on how we can improve the show to make for a better listening experience. If you want to find additional Overwatch content, of course, we have our podcast directory, which is Overwatch Recall. And I forgot to edit this week, but I know Fitzy and CarQ actually just started an Overwatch podcast.
Oh.
It was a couple of days ago. So episode 1 is on Fitzy's channel, so I highly recommend you guys go check it out. So that's going to be more... I want to say they said general Overwatch, but they're going to touch up a lot on like streaming and content creation aspects of the game as well, so go check that out. And every Sunday we do the episodic listings of all of the prior week's episodes from the Overwatch content creators. So to find all the latest on that front, follow Overwatch Recall at OW Recall. Now, of course, we do have a podcast network, so if you want to support us, you can do so a number of ways. We do stream pretty regularly over on Twitch, so any sort of Twitch Prime subs thrown our way are greatly appreciated. We also have the Tier 1 subs at $4.99, and then we have our Patreon at patreon.com/OWL Network. There we have tiers starting at just $1 a month, so guys, honestly, any little bit helps. Cover Libsyn, just the provider costs of hosting podcasts, because it does rack up there, especially having multiple podcasts. But you too can join the likes of our Master and Above patrons, Blazing Bob, Brendan, Jay-Z, Owl, and Kesha, and helping our network grow.
Praise be Bob.
And of course, guys, it's BlizzCon season. With that, we have Calm Before the Storm, so that is on Halloween night at the Hilton in Anaheim. We have the Overwatch panel starting at 7:30 p.m. Pacific time, hosted by yours truly. And I will be joined by my network co-host, Edinar, and also your co-host on Push to Point, Ramses. And we also have D from Omnic Weekly, Blevins from High Noon, and of course, that panel will be available on Podcatchers. And LoBosco, I know you're going to be going out there again, so this will be your second time out there.
Yeah.
So, what are you most looking forward to in regards to BlizzCon this year?
I'm looking forward to maybe some Overwatch announcements. World Cup is always fun. Like, that's where I basically spent my entire time last year.
Mm-hmm.
This year, I think I'm going to try and see more of the con than I did last year, because last year I basically did not leave World Cup. So I think I'm going to try and see a little bit more, especially to, like, I think we're going to have some good announcements for Diablo. So I really am excited to see some of the other stuff. I think that's my goal this year, is see a little bit more than I did last year. But then, of course, everything afterwards, like some of the after parties, are going to be a ton of fun. I've made some more friends as far as Blizzard people, so I'm probably going to end up doing some stuff with them. I don't know yet, so just everything. And then, of course, getting to see all the podcast guys. And it actually it's funny. We both live in Illinois. We're both in Philadelphia, and we have not seen each other yet. So getting to actually meet you in person is going to be an absolute pleasure, my friend. So, like, just some of those things I'm really looking forward to. It's going to be, I think, a very good BlizzCon.
Yeah, and for those that don't know, basically Ramses told me, hey, I already knew you were from Illinois, and Ramses just like, I was like, okay, where in Illinois? LoBosco's only like 30 minutes from me, guys.
Yeah.
Like, how crazy is that? And then, of course, Ed is up in Cheeseland, not too far either. But definitely, if you're going to BlizzCon, check out Calm Before the Storm. They got a ton of stuff going on. They got panels for basically all of the games, except Heroes of the Storm. because that was kind of replaced by WoW Classic. But it'll be a good time, and we hope you guys check it out. And then if you can't make it, we will have the panel available on our RSS feed. You can also find it on the Push the Point RSS feed at a later date as well. But if you guys want to reach us, you can do so via email at contact@owlnshow.com. We do have our website, owlnshow.com. On Twitter, of course, same thing, at owlnshow. Our YouTube channel is youtube.com/Overwatch League Network. And of course, you can join us on Discord. We do have 2 giveaways going on until next week. We're giving away a virtual ticket for BlizzCon. We're also giving away an Overwatch League jersey of your choosing. And you need to be on our Discord to do that in the podcast giveaways channel. So go to discord.me/OWLN show to enter our giveaway. And we'll have that announced next Monday. And of course, we do stream on Twitch at twitch.tv/OWLN show. We do have 2 shows right now every week. That is Overwatch League Network. That is the podcast you're currently listening to. That is Mondays at 7 p.m. Pacific time. And then we have our flagship show, which is Heroes Never Die, our variety Overwatch show, which I have no idea how we're going to keep anywhere near 2 hours this week. That is Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific time. And then host streams do run on a flex schedule, but, with BlizzCon coming up, that's definitely going to put a hamper on that. And one more time, our Patreon is at patreon.com/OWL Network. Now, with that being said, LoBosco, of course, I know you have your own podcast alongside a fellow co-host of mine as well, in Ramsey. So why don't you go ahead and shill your Overwatch League podcast, that, of course, being Push the Point.
I'm glad you asked about it. Yes, Push the Point is the podcast. Any of your major podcast catchers you can go to and just type in Push the Point. You'll find us. We'll be there. Spotify, too. If you listen to podcasts on Spotify, that's a really good one. That one actually gives a lot of information, too. It's a cool thing about Spotify. So if you do Spotify, that gives us more info about our demographics. So that's a good one. I also am a caster. So we most recently, I did the Chicago LAN that was at Ignite Gaming Lounge that happened this past weekend. That was a lot of fun. And I'm doing open division practice season for Europe. So if you're up early on a Saturday morning and you want to see some good Overwatch, be sure to watch that. Some of the games were really good. 6 maps for a best of, first to 3 is what I ended up getting the morning that I get to do a game right after doing a LAN all day. So it was wild. It was awesome. And we had 1,000 people watching on the Contenders channel. It's just awesome.
That's crazy.
So it's really cool that tier 3 is getting that support, but we need more. We still need more. So support tier 2, support tier 3. I'm always going to say that regardless anyways. I will shill for all of the people that I've met through there who are all awesome. And I just have fun getting the chance to do that. And, we'll see where I end up going with this casting thing anyways. So
head coach.
So just maybe head coach, I guess so. We'll see if I decide to go that route. But still, be sure to watch that. I have a lot of fun. I'm not always the person who does it. There's a bunch of us that get to do EU Open Division. There's a lot of good casters, a lot of casters who do this through Broadcast GG and through the Contenders channel have gone on to do some bigger and better things too. So just, you want to see the future of Overwatch, go watch these games. I could talk about this forever. So, but obviously my podcast too, we have a lot of fun. We've had Totem on there before. We're going to get him on there again eventually in the future. We've got a couple other guests that are coming up too that I'm really excited for, that we haven't set a date yet, but we've got some very well-known Contenders broadcasters that are probably going to be making their way onto the broadcast as well. So just look out for that. So it's a good reason why you may want to listen to Push the Point, other than, Ramses and I, but who cares about us?
I mean, if you guys need your full of sports talk and or One Piece, absolutely go check out Push the Point.
Go check out my Twitter too, because I tweet about 3 different things. I tweet about One Piece, Chicago sports, and Overwatch. Those are my 3 things that I tweet about and I post stupid memes that I see that I like. That's all that you get from my Twitter. So if you want to do that, at LoBosco is where you can do that. LoBosco. I won't be mad if you don't put the capital B in there, but there's a capital B.
Well, it's not case sensitive, so that works.
Right,
too.
Exactly. So it doesn't matter. but it will show up if you put in the capital P. So.
Absolutely. And as for myself, you can also find me on Twitter at TumblyDrunkCTR. You can find me usually just memeing and just poking fun at the Outlaws more times than not. But, who knows? We'll see what other moves they make, and if they make, more moves, maybe I'll just move on to Boston or Florida. Then again, Florida is technically rumored to be signing Runaway. We'll see if anything happens there. Please not Runaway on to Florida. As much as I want to see Runaway 1.0 versus 2.0, that would be fantastic. Not on that front.
I'm okay with it now because I like some of the people there that are there now, and some of the parts that were removed have made it better in my mind too. But like, I'm really good friends with Thibbledork. I've been getting to know Anthony as well. Those are two people who are part of the Florida organization that are awesome and that make the Florida brand like super worth paying attention to. So like, if they get Runaway, like those guys are gonna do so much awesome stuff with them. Like, I actually am okay with this now. If this was like 6 months ago, you're damn right I would have been right there with you, Totem, saying no. But now I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it now.
We'll see if they got picked up wholesale once. Maybe it'll be a second time.
Yeah,
but
maybe they will.
With that being said, guys, we are going to close out the show. So thank you so much again for joining us tonight on another episode of Overwatch League Network. This has been episode number 101. I've been your host, Tumbly Drunk, joined this week by my guest, LoBosco from Push the Point, and also Open Division Castin, and we hope to see you guys back on Wednesday for our next episode of Heroes Never Die. Take care, and have a good night.